Got the red dot. So
Huh?
Got the red dot.
Okay, is the timer going?
Yep. Timer's going.
Timer's going. Okay, good to know.
Okay, hi, I am David Barron on 9/25/2024. I'm with the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Share Your Story Project. Bellevue University is a sponsor of the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation Memorial Park Project. I'm at the Lincoln County Museum with Henry Russell, a Vietnam veteran who has agreed to share his story for the Library of Congress Veteran History Project and the Nebraska Vietnam Memorial Park Project. Henry, let's begin with your full name.
Henry Eugene, E-U-G-E-N-E, Russell, R-U-S-S-E-L-L, Jr.
And where were you born, Henry?
I was born in Kermit, Texas.
Tell me about your parents and what were their occupations.
My father was drove a dump truck and hauled stuff for oil fields in Texas.
Your mother?
And my mother was a homemaker at that time.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
I had 2 half-brothers and a half-sister. Different father, same mother.
Okay, did they serve in the military?
One brother did. One brother served prior to Vietnam. He served in Germany for 2 years.
Okay. What school, college, or whatever did you attend before joining the service?
I went K through 8th in Whitman, Nebraska. Kindergarten through 3rd was in one room with one teacher, and 4 through 8 in the other room. And I drove 40 miles a day, 20 each way, back and forth from a ranch I grew up on to Hyannis High School. And then to try to avoid the draft, I went to college in California for 1 semester and then got married young, and I still got my draft notice.
What were your parents or siblings' feelings about you joining the service?
My mother was, of course, pretty upset, as all mothers are, because, like I say, I was drafted and then I re-enlisted after a week for an extra year. My brother that had been in the Army as a medic, he told me to be sure on the test to not let them know that I liked camp and stuff like that, so I wouldn't be a grunt. And that's why I volunteered for the extra year. So my sister and other older brother didn't say too much, but
You say you volunteered for an extra year. What did that get you?
that got me the opportunity to go to Chinook helicopter maintenance training to be a flight engineer or crew chief, and I went to that school in Fort Eustis, Virginia.
Okay. Were you married before you joined the service?
I was.
Okay. What did your spouse think of you being in the military?
She wasn't happy at all. She had just had a miscarriage about 2 weeks before. And when we pulled away from Alliance, we were living in Alliance, Nebraska. And she wouldn't even look at me as I was leaving in the bus to go to Denver. So she was not happy at all.
Did you hold any jobs before joining the service?
Several. Right out of high school, I was a brakeman for Burlington Northern, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy at that time. And when the beat campaign then ended 5 months later, then my own brother bumped me in Guernsey, Wyoming, where I was working on the switch engine. And then after I went to a semester at college in California, I went to work at a plant east of Alliance that's now a hose plant. And we made snow skis for True Temper. And that's where I was working when I got my draft notice.
Okay, can you tell us about when you went into the military? You said you were drafted and then you re-enlisted.
Yes.
When you first went into the military, can you tell us about that?
Well, I had a little bit of a bad situation in Denver. They put me in a room all by myself because I was a criminal. I and my buddies from Wyoming, while we was going to college, California, came home at Easter, and the one in particular, and we were just as guilty as I and the other guy, because we knew the other guy was siphoning gas, and we got fined, picked up for petty larceny in Provo, Utah for siphoning gas. So I was a criminal, so they didn't want me, so they put me in a room by myself and come in and then asked me, did you pay that $20 fine? I said, I paid my $20 fine because my aunt wired me the money, and the other two jerks both. So I had that happen before, during the all the paperwork and physical in Denver. So
you said you were drafted, and you said why you extended so you could go to helicopter maintenance?
Yes, after a few days, they came through the line with paperwork. We were each holding our files and asked us if we wanted to go to warrant officer school if you had certain scores. And then they'd tear a certain color flap tag off. And I didn't want to give them 4 years. And then they asked if we wanted to go be mechanics. And my buddy and I, he was aware of the Chinook helicopter. So that's when we volunteered. They put us in a room for the weekend, exempt from duty for 2 days. And that's when 2 guys from Gordon re-enlisted to be mechanics on trucks. And he and I, the guy that became my friend from Denver, re-enlisted for 3 years to go to helicopter maintenance school.
Okay. Who or what important things did you leave behind when you left home?
Well, I left my wife and a job, and that's about all that comes to my mind. Some friends. You find out real quick if you go into law enforcement or into the military who your friends really are. I know that.
Okay. Which branch of service did you enter?
United States Army.
How did you get to your initial point of entry?
I was bused from Alliance to Denver. In Denver, we were on a plane, and we flew to Albuquerque and picked up and dropped off people, and then flew into El Paso, Texas. And so I took my basic at Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas.
Okay. After basic training, what other types of training or schooling did you have?
Well, the one thing I would say about basic, I did get high PT test award in my company.
Okay.
So, and then after basic, I and the other guy flew after our leave to Fort Eustis, Virginia, and that was trauma all in itself. Denver was, you got to be there. You're going to get in trouble for not reporting on time, and that Denver was sewed in because this is like February or March, whatever it was. And so he was pretty resourceful, and he got a hold of the Air Force and found out a C-130, or prop driven anyway, was leaving Denver. So we got a taxi out and flew. And you want to imagine, and it's no wonder I've got hearing problems today that the Army doesn't buy. The flying from Denver all the way to Virginia in that prop driven Air Force was an experience.
Pretty chilly too, huh? What is your most vivid memory of your time training in school?
Well, the biggest thing for me was 3/4 the way through the training, what was it, 13 weeks, I can't even remember anymore, at Virginia, I got appendicitis. And so after spending a week in the hospital when they took my appendix, they gave me 30 days, I think, anyway, so many days convalescent, because carrying them tech manuals around that were huge and marching as many from classroom to classroom was an experience. And so I had to go in the next class behind me, and they were a couple of weeks behind me. So in the class that I was in, I and my buddy were the honor grad, would have been the number 1 and 2 in the class. And all of this, he got to stay there as an instructor, and there was only 1 or 2 out of 40 some that went to Vietnam. Yeah. And the next class I was in, all but about 2 of us went straight to Vietnam. And while I was at Fort Eustis, Eustis, even Uncle Sam thinks it sucks. It's an acronym for that.
You can say anything you want on this video.
And I played on the company softball team, second base, and I was doing very well. And our lieutenant in charge of that kind of thing for physical and everything, he says, did you ever run track in high school? I said, yeah, I ran hurdles, 220, and highs and lows hurdles and relays. He says, well, last night when we was playing softball, our guys, the track guys, competed in track. He says, the only thing left tonight is 440 intermediate hurdles. Well, if you ever ran a 440 in high school, coming around that last curve and you got 5 flights of hurdles left in front of you was an experience. And I got second in that, so I got a big cake platter like thing engraved for getting that in AIT. And our company won the competition on base.
What was the best part of your training?
Well, I enjoyed the mechanical aspect of learning about jet engines, but when you got to learn hydraulics and electric both, and all our tech manuals covered a number of feet on at each one of us desk in our barracks, and we took whatever manuals, and when you open them outlays and you see those schematics and you suddenly discover that hydraulics flows the same way as electricity, that was a nightmare. The actual hands-on, you know, whether it's packing a wheel bearing on the landing gear, but the actual hands-on working on the engines and stuff, I enjoyed that.
What was the worst part?
Of course, the tests, because we didn't were treated very well in AIT. We weren't treated anything like basic, and so you said the worst part, marching half a mile or 3/4 of a mile, carrying them tech manuals in the rain. And a colonel or a general had seen us get wet one time, so we had that rest time we were in all those weeks, we had to carry those tech manuals, plus our raincoats. And so there you were packing all. That was the worst part, I think, marching classrooms with the manuals and our raincoats.
Does any of your instructors stand out in your mind, and why?
I had one instructor, I can't say his name right, a big strong man in basic that I respected a great deal. He was an E6 drill sergeant, very good man.
What was your first assignment after basic training and schooling?
My first assignment after leave was to report to Vietnam, which was an experience in itself. When we landed, they lost my bag, and there I am in khakis and my dress low quarters. And I was one of the unfortunate ones that got sent up to Camp Alpha R&R Processing Center for a week. And so I wore that same do you think anybody bothered to give me any uniforms? No. For a week, I wore those same clothes, and we worked in the cafeteria.
Mess hall.
Mess hall, there we go, mess hall. And they'd flood that thing after every meal with several inches of water, and there you were squeegee mopping that thing after every meal. Then when you're done, you'd go out in between meals and fill sandbags, and there I was in them khakis and low quarters. And I guarantee you, after a week I was ripe. So it took a week before I finally got sent to Lane Army Heliport at An Son, ANSON, An Son, Vietnam, west of Quy Nhon, 196 Attack Support Helicopter Company.
Did you receive any specialized training once you got there?
Absolutely none.
Did you get qualified on any specific equipment, vehicles, aircraft, radios, weapons, etc.?
Well, I was trained. We did qualify with the M16 for 2 days while I was at Fort Eustis. So I was trained with the 16 before I went over. And the only thing I would say was once I went to work in any special training once I was got out of the flight platoon and went to work in flight operations, they assigned us a 3/4 ton pickup to haul some of the stuff. Occasionally they had to have a dance band come through, and we'd haul them up to the officers club and stuff. So guess who got assigned that? Because the rest of the people in flight operations were all clerks, and here I was a mechanic, but I'd never been trained on the military trucks. And the CW3 that was in charge of that motor pool was wonderful man, but he was tough. He was in charge of the motor pool. Well, eventually, some months later, after the captain in flight operations gets in trouble, he's assigned flight operations officer. Then he treated me pretty well. But man, oh man, those guys messed with me. Anything on that 3/4 ton that needed done, I had to do it. Include, they give me a stitch kit, needle and stuff for that canvas like seats in those trucks, and I had to stitch that up and then apply like a glue to the stuff. I mean, I was tired. I'll bet it took me 3 days to get that 3/4 ton in shape to satisfy that CW3 warrant officer. And so if you call that training, yeah, that was training. I was trained to run a generator and qualified with a generator in case our flight operations, our communications people taught me how to start and service a generator we never did have to use.
Okay. Do you have any promotions while you were there? Or?
I did. I went over right out of AIT as a specialist 4th class E4. So you jump from 2 to 4 after going to helicopter maintenance. A year later, I made specialist 5th class. Our sergeant 1st class had an emergency come home, had to go stateside. I was the ranking E5 of the enlisted men in flight operations. And so then they made me an acting buck sergeant, still an E5. So I came home then as a specialist 5th class. I reverted back to specialist.
What was the hardest part of the military lifestyle for you to adapt to, and why?
I didn't have too much trouble adapting. I think the loneliness, like in Vietnam, and even as in basic, I had gone to college, driven to California at age 19 by myself, and I was drafted. I turned 21 in, right when I was drafted. But the loneliness, I think, was the hardest part for me.
What was the easiest part of the military lifestyle?
Well, for me, the easiest part was looking good. I mean, they used to pay me 5 or 6 guys to polish their boots and stuff, and I enjoyed for years until recently. I still used to any black boots, I would spit shine them. So I think trying to look good in uniform was a good part for me.
Now we're going to talk about your wartime service specifically.
Excuse me.
You said you served at Ansan, right?
Yes.
Okay. What did you like most about where you served and why?
We were in 2 Corps in Vietnam, which is the mountainous area, and we were down below a hill, and I grew up in the sand hills of Nebraska on a ranch, and that hill somehow reminded me of home. So, and the barracks, you looked out the barracks to the east, the sun rose in the east, and that's the way it was at home. And there were several things that I liked there. I liked most of the people I worked with, and after some months, a stray dog attached to me. So they allowed me to keep that dog in I made a room in our billet with plywood, and that dog followed me everywhere. That dog laid at my feet in flight operations. The mess hall gave me food to feed him, and so I had that dog 3/4 time I was in Vietnam, so that helped me a lot.
Okay. What role did you serve in Vietnam? Combat support, or?
Well,
combined?
Mainly combat support when you're in a helicopter. Yeah, if you're flying door gunner, you're sitting behind an M60 50 cal. But to say normally 3/4 time you never fire around. So I'd say most of mine was support, because yeah, I flew some as a helicopter crew chief or door gunner, but the rest of the time I was in flight operations, typing reports, you know.
What were your missions like when you went out?
Well, where we were at, we supported the Capitol Rock Entry Division of the Koreans. Good soldiers, the best I ever saw. And I made friends. They served on one side of our perimeter as security guard, as guards on the perimeter, and we had the rest of it. And I became friends with a Sergeant Kim, that was their physical training officer. And one time on a mission in December of '68, he took a picture of me with my flak blasted helmet on, set behind the 60 on a Chinook. So generally, we'd be hauling troops and kicking them out.
Yeah.
To an LZ, pickup zone, go to a pickup zone, pick them up, drop them off in the LZ. And a couple of times we would see SAM, surface-to-air missiles, go by, 100 yards away from you, and you hope the next one wouldn't get you. So it was the first 3 months when I did volunteer to fly. I didn't have any incidents whatsoever, and a few times to support an American ground unit, we'd fly into the Quignon and we'd pick up ice cream to take to the troops in the field. Yeah. Well, lo and behold, the pilots, when we'd go to Lane Army Heliport, where we were stationed first, and they used to say, well, we hovered and some fell off back. That isn't true. They sat down, and some of that would come off and go to our mess hall. So the first 3 or 4 months, occasionally we got ice cream. Well, suddenly the general that was their commanding officer found out what was going on. Well, they didn't let us pick up ice cream anymore. But then it all changed. December of 1968, we had flown for 10 or 12 hours that day, and routine, pick up soldiers, supplies, move from one location to another. And we were the last crew to come in that day, and it was getting dusk, and they called it a TAC-E, a Tactical Emergency Mission. And the first 25 hours in country, a warrant officer, at least the group I was with, they required a young warrant officer right out of school to fly with an instructor-rated pilot, which was Korbelik. So Korbelik, as I recall, was on the right pilot seat, and Bill Thompson out of Oklahoma, just about 3 months younger than me, his first mission in country. And then we had a crew chief on the right door gun, me on the left door gun, sitting on the foot locker with a foam pad on top of it, and we picked up a Korean guide who took us to a pickup zone where we picked up 10,000 pounds of concertina wire. And we flew to a landing zone at the base of a small mountain where the Koreans had set up, Capitol Rock Infantry Division had set up a perimeter around this base, this mountain, where the Viet Cong were. And their plans was to run concertina partway around the mountain and around their camp. And we got to about 100 feet off the ground or so. And I remember the flight engineer, he's laying over the hole, and he's got a pistol grip deal that he can release the load, or either the pilots can. And I remember him saying, sir, because the load can oscillate, and he says, sir, the load looks good. Well, where we got shot from was in front of the helicopter. I couldn't see it. I had the other guy on the crew chief couldn't see any. And the flight engineer immediately over the hole started screaming. He had shrapnel in his chest. And Korbelik, the instructor pilot, got shot in the heel and come out his knee, anyway, in the leg. And he was in and out of consciousness. Before he went out, the first thing he did was when the flight engineer was screaming, he says, Russ, called me Russ for Russell, go back and unplug him. So I ran out over and unplugged him from his mic so he can scream on the intercom. Rolled him over and tried to administer first aid. And the crew chief is still on behind his M60 with nothing to shoot at. And I seen that the Korean guide had got shot through both thighs. It was the first time I had seen oxygenated blood. And I tried to help him the best I could. And since then, I hadn't seen Thompson for 50 years. So 3 out of the 6 of us got hit. I never got hit. Young Thompson, warrant officer, never got hit. And the crew chief never got hit. And he told me when he picked me up at a campground in Texas 5 years ago, I says, and took us to supper, I says, Bill, I always figured from the rotor wars that the Koreans had shot us because they didn't like us throwing rocks at me. He says, no, Henry. They were green tracers. They were not red tracers. So it was Charlie shooting at us. I says, well, there was nothing. He said, well, it came from the front. Well, when they took that, what he did, he radioed CW3, the warrant officer in charge of flight operations, and he asked him, he says, what do I do? And he told him, he says, have you been listening to your military channels like you're supposed to? You've been listening to Quinyon to the radio rock and roll all days. We've been listening to rock. He says, vector in on that and fly in. It'll take you right to the hospital where the landing pad is. And Thompson flew us in there. It took about 20 minutes, and they all 3 survived. Then when that ship went into maintenance, the flight control closet is right by where I'm sitting, and in that is a lot of the avionics for the ship and flight controls. And one of the push-pull tubes, we call it, a flight control tube, not very long, was shot half in 2 is all it kept us in the air. And they later gave that, when Korbelik went back, eventually they gave him that, he carried his flights back. The rest of the time he was in the Army in his flight bag. And they found the footlocker I was sitting on had 2 rounds lodged in with hydraulic hoses and hydraulic wrenches where I was sitting. So somebody was watching out for me that day. That was the closest one I had.
What can you do to aid the war effort? The people of the town quickly embraced raised.
I had another scary one after that, but
Okay, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
What got you through the hard times?
my dog, because my wife didn't write me often enough.
I knew you didn't say that. What was a typical day for you in Vietnam?
Well, when I worked nights, for months I was the only one working nights in the unit. And so I can't tell you whether it was half a mile, it was more than a quarter mile up on the hill where our barracks was, carry my M60, an old dog following me down to flight operations, and everybody else would be getting ready to go. And so I would work all night. The Korean major liaison to the Koreans would bring us all the pickup zones and landing zones. And so if we had 8 ships out of 16 that was assigned to us ready to fly, you had to prepare all those flight sheets. So I'd be sitting writing all night long preparing those flight sheets and put them on clipboards for the pilots the next morning. Well, they didn't feed us.
Yeah.
No mess hall open. How was I to eat? So one day, after a couple of months, I heard our company commander major talking to Captain Shirley, at that time our flight operations officer, about missing sea rations out of the helicopters. And I could hear him because the doorway, there was no door. It was petitioned off waist high. So I went in and tapped on the side of the wall and I says, Major, can I confess? And he says, what's that, Russell? And I said, I'm the one stealing the sea rations. He looked at me funny because he liked me. And because I typed all those reports that he needed. And he says, I says, think about it, Major. Do you feed me at night? I'm the only one working the nights all by myself down here on the flight line. I'm it. I go out and help myself to a can of C rations out of the helicopters every night. He says, Russell, from now on, Supply will issue you a case of free C rations, and they'll be sitting at your desk every night. I never got no trouble, and I did. I had C rations from then to eat.
There you go.
You with it all.
And I remember that very well.
Okay, how did your time in Vietnam change you?
I think it made me angrier, moodier. I was a lot harder to get along with.
It is said that friendships developed in hard times are lasting. Can you tell us about some that you've made?
Can I tell you about this other incident
Sure.
first?
Sure, go ahead.
My dad died in June of '69 in Denver, and we were never close. My mom left him when I was 2, and I seen him when I was 3.5, then I seen him when I was 14. I went to Denver and seen him, and then I seen him when I got out of high school, and then when our little boy was born while I was in Vietnam, February of '69, my wife sent him a birth announcement, and he was pretty proud of that. But he died while I was in Vietnam, and my aunt in Denver, who I wasn't close to at all, I got called into the company commander, the same major again, and he says, Russell, he says, your dad died. And I says, you mean my stepfather? He says, no, his name's Henry Russell Sr. I said, yeah, that'd mean my father in Denver. He said, well, your aunt went to the Red Cross, we're sending you home on emergency leave. So they sent me home for 30 days on emergency leave. And so I got to see my son, who was 4.5 months old by that time. But then when I got back to Vietnam, I got to Phuket Air Force Base, and I called our flight operations sergeant, James Britt. I said, Sergeant Britt, do we have a test flight out? He says, yeah, they're a little ways away from me. He says, Lieutenant Price, the second lieutenant, is out. Well, so Lieutenant Price is somebody that I admired more than you would want to believe. He had been to Vietnam as a warrant officer flying Hueys. Then he went to OCS so he could finally make rank, because at that time, now they make CW5, but at that time 4 was as high as you could go. And so then he cross-trained to Chinooks, and now he's back in Vietnam. And he was actually in charge of maintenance and sign-offs of all the discrepancies in the flight and the books on the ships. He was in charge of that, and he was out with a test flight, him and 6 other guys. And in the meantime, a Huey from the 129th, a Huey company next door to us, picked up 2 of their guys. And they said, who are you waiting for? I said, well, I'm waiting for 196. And he says, what the pilot says, just throw your bags with us. So they dropped me off at the end of the runway, and the Sarge come out and got me in a Jeep. I don't know where he got the Jeep, but picked me up in a Jeep. In the meantime, Lieutenant Price and the other pilot and the other guys on board, several of them from maintenance, getting in their flight hours for months so they could get their flight pay.
Yeah.
And that Chinook comes in and it flares like that. Well, that Chinook that I was about 15 minutes away from being on did a back loop, come down and crashed and killed them all. And that about destroyed me. So that was a tough thing for me to deal with, watching that.
Remember you told me about that. Okay, did you develop any other friendships from Vietnam or that you still maintain? Or?
5 years ago, I had never managed to reach out. I've got friends on Facebook that I've never met that were in the company next door to us, but I have never found. I've found ones that lived that were there at different times, but not that I remember. And so, and I've tried. I've reached out, but what I went with the Dawson County Hero flight 5 years ago to DC, and I Googled where Lieutenant Price and those other guys' names are on the wall, and they're way up high where you can't reach. So I had one of the park police, she took a ladder and climbed up the ladder and rubbed his name for me. And when I Googled his place on the wall, I found his brother, and the military had done a whole bunch of things in his honor. And in fact, there's another, it was Balls 1001 was the name of the helicopter that crashed. And they assigned that number, tail number, to another Chinook. And I found the email and phone number for his brother. And so I emailed him, and he put me in charge with Olson, CW3 at that time, in Washington, the state of Washington, with Les in Coker in Florida, Bobby Springer I had contact with in Texas. He has since died, because all these guys are in the 80s, but except for a couple. One, Daryl Jaggers in Ohio, but Thompson from Oklahoma, that was there the day we got shot up, he was the pilot that flew us into Quinyon. I have since seen him face to face, but so I've got about 5 pilots that are all my friends on Facebook, and that's helped me deal with some of that old long-term grief a lot.
Oh, that's good. Okay. What was the bravest, funniest, scariest, or saddest thing you experienced? I know the saddest thing you talked about.
The saddest thing, of course, was that helicopter crash. I don't know if I can really discuss anything too brave, other than I thought Thompson was a pretty brave young man, 20 years old, to fly that helicopter in and land it, you know, with no more experience than he had.
Yeah. Okay. What did it sound like, smell like, etc., where you were at in Vietnam?
Oh boy.
Helicopter.
When it would rain, when monsoon season was on, you couldn't stay dry if you were outside ever. So you always had that to deal with. And we didn't have to, but the places that were used as a latrine were wood construction with a flat door in back, and they would take a 50-gallon drum and cut it in half and open up that flap, slide it under where the seat was. And so in a lot of places in Vietnam, soldiers had to use a combination of different fuels to burn feces. Well, fortunately, they hired Vietnamese to do it from the village. But the smell of that burning right outside of our building was not pleasant to deal with. And then when you were flying the Koreans around, you want a smell that you'll never forget. Kimchi. When you smell, and those guys all reeked of kimchi, and that smell you'll never forget.
Yep.
What do you do for recreation in your downtime, if you had any?
I never got to do much in Vietnam, because I worked at one point 8 months, 7 days a week without a day off. And I didn't get to go on R&R. I did get to come home for that 30 days when my dad died. But beyond that, I didn't go on R&R, because my wife was expecting for some months while I was over there. Then she had that little guy. I never got to see any movies while I was there. I did get to, I was a softball player and a good one. I did get to watch some other guys one Sunday afternoon play a softball game. I think I went, when I made E5, I think I went to the non-commissioned officers club one time and got a burger and a beer. And I did a few times. This Korean sergeant from down below us, we played 2-on-2 basketball with a couple of guys. We had one hoop and we played on dirt, and I did play probably 4 or 5 times with him, a few hours. And that's probably the extent of my while I was in Vietnam.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events? Or?
No,
Somebody getting caught with their pants down in the rain?
I can't really remember anything that was I did one time when I hauled a Korean floor show with band and a couple of beautiful Korean women up to the officers club. My friends, the officers, were my buddies, you know, and they made me sit down. And even though I was supposed to be on duty down in flight operations, there wasn't nobody in flight operations. Sat down, the company commander says both, and made me drink a beer with them while I was on duty. And I did get to see that Korean. The one thing I forgot, Christmas Day, 1968, December 25th, 1968, some of us lucky ones, I think one helicopter load of us, 30-some guys, got to go see Bob Hope and Ann Margaret at Phuket Air Force Base. And that was an experience into itself.
Yeah.
That was a great experience.
Okay, do you recall the day your service ended and where were you at?
Oh boy, do I remember. When I came back stateside, I was stationed from October of 69 through January of 71 at Fort Rucker, Alabama. And I wasn't attached to a Chinook company there. I was attached to attack helicopter training branch that they train, the pilots that we supported. They trained all the Huey gun pilots going to Vietnam. And so I was stationed the last 6 months I was in Alabama. I found out about an OJT thing. And so 6 months in the afternoon, half a day, I could drive out to the Chevrolet dealership. And I thought I wanted to become a mechanic or a body man on Corvettes and stuff. And so I worked with a Corvette specialist that they had, a big Chevrolet dealership. All he did was work on Corvettes. So half a day, 4 hours a day for the last 6 months, I learned to work on fiberglass Corvettes. And so I was stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama when I was discharged in January 1971.
What was your reception like when you came back from Vietnam?
Bad. The one that bothered me the most, I didn't get spit on, or like some of the guys in California or in Seattle. One time I went over through California, the other time I went over through California, and one time through Seattle. But when I got home to Guernsey, Wyoming, where my wife lived with her parents, and then I found a job, the first thing my World War II vet father-in-law says, "Kid, you don't know what war is." And I've never forgotten that. So that was my worst experience right there.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
It wasn't easy for me.
No.
The major that got promoted to lieutenant colonel tried to talk me into re-enlisting. And I almost did, but by them changing my MOS, if I had re-enlisted as a helicopter maintenance, I could have got 10,000 variable re-enlistment bonus. And where now it's flight operations on all my paperwork, I'd have got a couple of thousand, and I wasn't going to re-enlist for I wasn't even that, enough to buy a decent car, and even in those days. And so I had a lot of trouble because the first job I got was working at the schools in Scottsbluff and maintenance. My brother-in-law happened to be in charge of maintenance. And after a few months, that job petered out, and then I went out to Lockwood, East Gearing, and worked in the parts department, picking parts for big dealers with their irrigation systems and all the stuff they sold to their dealers. And so I got out in January 71, and I had several jobs. And then that fall, I applied to Nebraska State Patrol, and so I was sworn in then in December of 71 on State Patrol in Nebraska. And that was a better job.
How did the service change you?
How did the service change me? Well, yet today, I think some of the moods I get in and dealing with my anger and frustration, I was always a happier guy until the service.
How did the service affect the way you relate to others?
Well, I don't have the patience with others that I should, and when I get frustrated because they won't listen to what you're trying to tell them, then my voice starts, especially because I'm hard of hearing, starts elevating, and so I tend to make a lot of people angry.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
I have been a member of the VFW. I'm not right now, but I am a member of the American Legion and the American Legion Riders.
Have you attended any reunions?
I've attended one Nebraska Vietnam reunion here in North Platte. I haven't been out of town to any of them.
Okay.
That's the only one. The unit I was with, I'm sure they've had some, as I understand, but they're in the South where I can't afford to go.
What are some life lessons you learned from your military service?
Well, again, it goes back to the uniform. When I wore a state patrol uniform, I was in law enforcement over 20 years, and I respected the uniform, so I always kept my uniform looking good, my patrol car clean, and so some of those lessons on your appearance, I always tried to keep my appearance up, and that was a big thing I learned from the military.
How has your service impacted your feelings about the military in general?
I still respect the military. I have a lot of respect, especially for those still serving. I only served, when you figure the time I came home, just less than a year in Vietnam. And I see some of those young guys that went to Iraq and Afghanistan 4 or 5 times. And so I've got a lot of respect for all those young people that serve today.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view your story?
Boy, I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't know. I'd like to see people return to the basic things that this country was conceived on, to their faith, our politicians. We have so many corrupt politicians, and so I would like to see this country go back the way it was closer to after World War II in the early 50s, which we're never going to see. That's about all I could say.
Okay. First of all, thank you for taking time to share your reflections. Is there anything else you'd like to add that wasn't covered?
No, not really. I think I've pretty well said everything I'd like to
Have
say.
you shared any of this info with any of your family members? Or?
I have. I think both of my sons respect the time I spent in the military. But sometimes it's hard for them to understand, you know, what a person can't relate to what you went through, you know.
Well, welcome home, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
That pretty much concludes the interview, so. Got anything else?